YouTube, what's going on? Another reaction video. This time it's Summoning Salt style, but it's not Summoning Salt. This is courtesy of Yopes. I don't know how you pronounce it, but this is the history of the longest lasting record, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. This randomly popped up in my recommendation, or just like it auto-played. And as you can see, I watched the first 30 seconds, and I was like, you know what? This seems like it could be a fun video for the stream. So I stopped there and I kept it. And like I said, this popped up, but it popped up this morning. And then I saw it was half an hour, and I was like, well, today we're doing reaction videos all day anyways. Why not check it out? So, once again, shout out to Yopes. And I'm very, very curious to see what this is like, because the intro was interesting. Let's check it out, shall we?
The golden rule of Mario Kart speedrunning is that no matter how perfect a record may seem, it will always be broken eventually. But every once in a while, a run
How's the audio gamers? Are we good?
This rule, if only temporarily. These speedruns can stay at the top of their leaderboards for months and even years before they're finally beaten. In the Mario Kart 8 Deluxe time trialing community, these records are tracked in a small subpage where the run that has stayed unbroken for the longest is crowned the duration record. This is the story of that category and the brutal competition.
No, yes, the audio looks like it's okay, so
record in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe.
If it's too quiet or loud, somebody let me know. Otherwise,
for the first day
I'll
after
just
the
assume it's
game's
good.
release, most records only lasted a few hours. There had been quite a few changes to the way driving worked since the Wii U version of the game, so nobody was
fire hopping or whatever that was called?
Yet. Strangely, it only took 4 days for a run to stand alone as the duration record holder. This was a 200
and even though we just started this, I'm going to stand.
Time trial done by a runner named Dragneer on the same day that the game was released. Now, the reason for this is fairly simple. 200cc was a brand new mode that wasn't in Mario Kart 8 for the Wii U, and players simply weren't used to the extra speed, especially on a course as notoriously difficult as Neo Bowser City.
To be fair, these courses are clearly made for 150.
Through the cracks, it was immediately beaten. Only a couple days later, it happened again with Donut
one of the
Plains
hardest
3
tracks too. Goddamn.
This one actually stayed alive for a few more days before it was beaten by a run that got a coin a lap earlier and had a much better way of taking the Shroomless shortcut. And a few days later, it too was passed, but this time by a group of 3 records: Toad's Turnpike, Yoshi Circuit, and Sunshine Airport. These were all pretty good runs, and even though it was still in the early days, it looked like they might stay around.
There's the Wii U version, so they're coming in like very knowledgeable.
Strong due to how basic the course was. There's not a whole ton of places where you can save time, so when a fairly good record was put up by Cole, it wasn't super easy to beat. Yoshi Circuit was a good run because of Kevin. Kevin was a speedrunner who had put a lot of effort into optimizing this course in the first few days. He had managed to find quite a few new shortcuts and strategies, shaving 4 seconds off the record and setting a fairly impressive run in the process. The Sunshine Airport run had a very similar story to Yoshi Circuit, with a runner
I never knew about that shortcut.
Quite a few new tricks and simply executed his final run very well. However, in the coming weeks, both Toad's Turnpike and Yoshi Circuit would be beaten, which left the undisputed duration record to Matthew and Sunshine Airport for about a day before this one too was beaten. And this wasn't going to last.
I also just realized once again, Chris is not here for the Mario Kart speedrun reaction.
But the player Light had noticed something about one of these. At the end of the Dry Desert run, there's a Shroomless shortcut
Last time it was
where
the
you
Tetris
repeatedly
one.
hop over this off-road to cut off the corner. But Light discovered that if you hopped in the right spots, you were able to launch off of the upwards-facing part and spend much less time in the off-road. He implemented this trick into a time trial, and even though his lap 3 was frankly abysmal, this run was able to beat the old record by about 1/3 of a second. And now that Dry was out of the running, Jimmy's Sherbetland run was able to take the duration record. This run honestly wasn't that special. Of course, it was still fast, but that's all it was. There weren't really any difficult tricks done, and the driving was somewhat simplistic. So when a runner named Star XLX saw how long this run had stayed around for, he figured that it was probably fairly outdated and could be beaten relatively easily. And he was absolutely right. At 24 days of duration, Star XLX set a new record, and over the next couple days managed to get the time down by over half a second. But there's another aspect to this story, a part that Star XLX himself had completely overlooked. By beating Jimmy's Sherbetland run, he had unknowingly opened a chance at the duration record to a 23-day-old Mute City run, his own Mute City run. and it was going to be very hard to beat. Star XLX was able to get the Mute City record for one main reason: mushrooms. When the game was first released, people used their mushrooms at this shortcut near the end of the course because it's easily the largest on the track. But here's the thing, it's actually completely possible to take this shortcut without using a mushroom at all, which frees it up for use somewhere else. This trick is extremely difficult, but Star XLX still went for it on all 3 of his laps, resulting in a total time save of over 600 milliseconds and a world record that lasted for 23 days at this point. However, the Mute City run had competition. The Piranha Plant Slide 150cc record was also at 23 days, and this one seemed even more difficult.
Yeah, so the duration record, I thought it was for like a track, but it's like in general, the whole game.
Importantly used Inside Drift. Inside Drift is an alternative drifting style found on a few bikes in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. Unlike drifting on most vehicles where the back of your kart swings out wide in order to charge a mini turbo, these bikes do a maneuver that's best described as committing to the turn, where they lean in and turn very sharply. In almost all cases, vehicles with traditional drifting are superior, but in the early days of Piranha Plant Slide, inside drifting bikes were actually considered better for handling the course's rather unconventional layout.
Yeah, that one's another one of the hardest
version
ones.
is in time trials, there weren't that many players that could compete with it at this high of a level, and due to the fact that Penguin Samurai had almost exclusively time trialed Piranha Plant Slide, essentially nobody else had the driving ability to beat him. On May 28th, the 2 records passed the 24-day mark. Both were now technically the longest lasting, but for one of them to be crowned, one had to fall. And only a few days later, at 30 days of duration, Mute City was finally beaten. We don't have the original footage from the run that ended up beating Star XLX's, but by analyzing one of Danny's subsequent runs, it becomes pretty clear how he was able to take the top spot. His execution of the Shroomless shortcut was phenomenal, and his overall driving on the track was simply faster than the previous record. But here's the thing, Danny wasn't just any random player. He held the record with the next highest duration behind the 2 30-day runs. He had just taken out one of his competitors, and the other was next. Rather than being put off by the fact that Piranha Plant Slide used Inside Drift, Danny was actually excited by the prospect of learning how to use it at a high level, so he began working on taking the record down. After a while of playing on the course, he discovered that it was actually faster to go to the right path in the block section, and this gave him the last little advantage he needed to take the record for himself at 46 days. But later that day, Light beat his run, killing Danny's chances of getting the longest lasting record title. After this, there was a decent gap of a few weeks where there were essentially no challengers to the duration record. But on the 30th of June, another run took over from Piranha Plant Slide. Now, the reason this run survived is a little bit different. Of course, Cole's run was good, but it mostly comes down to this course simply not being very attractive to top-level speedrunners. Firstly, Moo is kinda just really boring. You go around in a circle 3 times, and there are essentially no places where interesting techniques or strategies come into play. But the final nail in the coffin is that this run is also Inside Drift, so while people kept ignoring this run, it kept gaining duration. This continued for about a month until it was finally taken off of the leaderboard at 70 days. At this point, there were a lot of active runs on the heels of the Moo Moo Meadow record, so it was clear that it was getting overtaken soon. The question was, by who? Turns out that it was simply the next run in line, SNES Rainbow Road by Ren. This run had experienced quite a bit of competition early on, and when you consider how simple the track is,
was all over
it
that
makes
bitch.
sense that this one would be really well optimized for the time. However, this wasn't enough to save it, and it was beaten a couple weeks later by a time trial that had a significantly better lap.
So hard.
And 2 days later, the duration record was taken again by a Grumble Volcano run from a player named Kevin. But with how quickly the duration record had been changing hands recently, surely this wouldn't stand for long.
Dude, whenever I see videos like this, I always think there must be so much work that goes into it, but the graph alone must be a pain to make. God damn.
200 days later, and Kevin's run was still at the top of the leaderboard. It was approaching 300 days of total duration with no sign of stopping. So how did we get here? Well, before I answer that question, I need to tell you about the sponsor of this video, Red Magic, and their brand new Astra gaming tablet. Inside, this thing is a monster.
Wait, that actually looks sick.
Snapdragon 8 Elite CPU, Adreno 830 GPU, and up to 24 gigabytes of RAM, meaning that no matter what I throw at this thing, it handles it perfectly. And all this powerful hardware is able to keep cool due to the 20,000 RPM gaming fan. But easily the
That
most
must be loud
impressive
as
part of
fuck.
the Astra
Dude, this thing
is
looks
the screen.
awesome.
Firstly, it's
The
an
hell?
OLED, so the color accuracy is phenomenal. It gets really bright too, with a peak of 1600 nits. And to round it all off, the display has a resolution of 2.4K and runs it up to 165 Hz, which means that on-screen motion is incredibly smooth. But being this powerful doesn't mean it compromises on its portability or form. It's barely over half a centimeter thick and weighs less than a Switch 2, even with the Joy-Cons detached. There's also this small switch on the side which can be
So this is a new video. If you're talking about Switch 2, this came out 2 weeks ago? What the fuck?
programmed to do a few different things, but by default it opens up Game Space, which is Red Magic's dedicated game launcher and overlay, which is great for quickly changing settings and accessing various information. Personally, my favorite thing about the Astra tablet is how perfect it is for sharing games from my computer while on the go. The screen lets me play in near original quality, while the excellent wireless connectivity and blazing fast processor keep latency low. So if any of this interests you, I highly recommend checking it out from the link in the description. And now, back to Kevin's 300-day-old record. This run had survived so long
just out of curiosity, how much does this cost? Let me hide the screen just in case. Out of curiosity. Continue to destination. 750 Canadian. God damn. Brutal.
a perfect storm of circumstances.
Yep.
Firstly,
About the same as the Switch 2.
was not very well liked by the
Switch 2 is like
community.
800-ish.
It was considered bouncy and unpredictable because of multiple places during the run that seemed like they were based more on luck than driving skill. Also, the fact that the run was on 200cc definitely hindered competition. Even though it was now almost a year since the game's release, runners were still not fully comfortable with the faster speed. Kevin's run was a bit of a golden outlier where everything just went perfectly. His shroom
I will
was
say,
flawless on all
in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, it definitely feels like it was made for 150cc, and 200cc is like too fast. Like, you get used to it, but it doesn't feel good compared to 150. Mario Kart World, because like I always say, it feels slower because there's so many more straightaways and wider areas because there's double the racers. In that game, I hope that they add a 200cc in an update, because I think I would play this in 150 and World in 200, I think.
Laps, and as far as racing lines go, his run was incredibly solid. All of these circumstances created an environment where not a single player had the drive to get the record, except for one. Meet Tommy, a runner from Ireland who liked Grumble Volcano far more than the typical runner. He had been time trialing the course recently and had actually been putting up some pretty good times.
Fucking eyelashes are long and they curl into each other.
World record before. Sure, he had been on the top 10 leaderboard a few times, but beating one of the best records in the game was a different beast entirely. But as Tommy's times continued to improve, people began rooting for him to take the #1 spot. By the 24th of March, he was in 3rd place on the leaderboards. Still half a second behind Kevin, but great progress. Over the next few months, he slowly got better and better until finally, on the 9th of May 2018, he got onto the best run of his life.
Imagine grinding one track, a 1.5 minute track, for months.
His lap 1 was faster than any world record up until that point, and by the start of lap 3, he was 530 milliseconds ahead of his 3rd place run, on pace to take world record. And he knew it. His nerves were through the roof, and yet he just kept going. And after hitting the shortcut and crossing the line, he checked the timer, a 1:24.956. Tommy had done it. Against all odds, he had gotten his first ever Mario Kart
okay, by the
world
way,
record
Sam?
on Grumble Volcano and had beaten the now 325-day-old run, meaning for the first time in nearly a year, the duration record was again up for grabs.
Wow.
So how long would it be before the longest-lasting record title was taken by another runner? Well, the truth is, at this point, Grumble Volcano wasn't the only one to make it to 300 days. There were
just fine,
4
alright,
of them,
thank
and
you.
the highest, a Shy Guy Falls record by Jimmy, was only a week away from taking the record. Jimmy's Shy Guy Falls record was incredibly impressive due to how ridiculously precise this
one
run
at 200 is
Firstly, there was
brutal.
a strat used at the beginning of the 2nd and 3rd laps where you cut across a small piece of grass. On its own, this isn't too difficult, but if you stay in it for just a little bit too long, the off-road takes all of your speed and kills the run. But the main difficulty with this track comes at the end.
Yeah.
First, you have to hit a perfect no-item shortcut.
Never even saw this ramp in my life.
To avoid losing speed, start another drift on the ramp, charge it in mid-air, midair, release it upon hitting the ground, and immediately start charging another mini-turbo. Then, while in the drift, you need to perfectly aim your kart to land just before the wall and then shroom around it. And this has to be executed perfectly on every single lap. So it's not too surprising that this run took the duration record and ran with it for a few weeks.
Dude.
But at 346 days, the player Davi
That's
managed
so
to improve
nasty.
the track in a few places and barely got a 28 millisecond improvement. And now that Shy Guy Falls was down, the record was ready to be passed on yet again. It looked like the next longest lasting run would be a Piranha Plant Slide 200cc run by a player named Blue. However, only 2 days after Shy Guy Falls was beaten, this record was taken by a player named Super FX, which meant that the next candidate for duration record became the only
I
other
assume that this
300
video-
day out of this group, which was a Sweet Sweet Canyon record held by none other than Jimmy. This run was his chance
I
to
assume
hold
this
on to the
person is
duration
influenced by
record
Summoning
even
Salt.
after the death of his Shy Guy Falls time.
Sure
And
seems like
looks
it.
like he might just
This is a
pull it
really
off.
good video.
This run was about as close to perfection as 8 Deluxe speedruns got at the time. There are so many places in this run where he gets incredibly
That being said,
close to a
you know what?
wall,
I say
and
that Summoning Salt's just the one that I'm the most familiar with. Could be that, you know, he was inspired by somebody else. Also, for those that weren't there, one day I rated him on Twitch, and he's like, "Oh, hey, Shizzy, I noticed that you were reacting to some of my videos." I was like, "The fuck, you saw that?" Out of like, you know, how many reactions does he get? And I was like, "Yeah, man, love the videos. Let me know if there's any problem with me reacting to them, and I could take them down." He's like, "No, I love that when people react to it." I was like, "All right, cool. That's awesome." I figured as much, but you know, maybe he's cool with like Charlie watching it and getting 1 million views. Maybe he's not cool with Shizzy watching it and getting like 20. You know?
and yet barely avoids bonking. The execution of the shroom shortcut was impeccable on all laps. It was an absolute masterclass in Mario Kart driving, and the duration showed.
I love this track.
As is the case with speedrunning, nothing lasts forever.
I just love
And
Mario
in
Kart
early
8.
June, a speedrunner named Super FX set his sights on the record. On the 8th, he managed to
Mario Kart
tie
8
Jimmy's
fucking
time
rips.
down to the millisecond. But to truly lower the record and knock it off of the duration leaderboard, he would need to beat it outright. And the very next day, he managed to do just that, lowering the time by 10 milliseconds. So now that this record has been
Crazy.
beaten, the next in line for the longest lasting record category should be this run, which is now at over 302 days. Right? Well, there's something that I haven't mentioned.
By the way, Sam, I don't know if
Super
you're
FX
interested,
wasn't the only
'cause I
person
know
to
you're
tie this record.
a
This
tech
feat had
audio
also
guy. These little fuckers, they last the entire week.
been accomplished by a player named Ryan.
I noticed last
302
week,
days
and
ago.
this week
That's
was
right,
on
this
Ninja
record
Gaiden.
Never had a chance at taking over from
After
Jimmy's
streaming 8.5
because
hours, it was the first
same
time I saw the
record.
light
And now
flashing
that
red,
this
so I was like,
one
okay,
wiped
that's
from
the limit.
board as well, there were no more runs to threaten Jimmy's lead.
But I
for
can't
the
believe
next
these little fuckers.
120 days. But as the next highest record reached 260 days, it was struck from the leaderboard. The next run in line, an 150cc Sherbetland run, barely lasted 11 days before it was beaten. The same thing happened with the next run, and the next, and the next. Almost as soon as these runs got on top, they would be beaten and drop out of the running. Despite
so
this, there was a
crazy.
clear trend upwards, making it inevitable that eventually a record would stick around for long enough. And finally, in March of 2019, one did. This was a Twisted Mansion 200cc record set by Timo. Like a lot of the other runs that had
I
held
like
the
that, me.
duration record before, this one uses a combo
The
with
teeth.
inside drift, and it is a beautiful use of it. Some of the corners on this track are cut so insanely close that it's genuinely unbelievable that these turns are even possible. There were
Holy.
some corners that might have been able to be taken slightly tighter, but with how insanely precise the rest of the course was, competing with Timo's record was a daunting task. And so nobody was
Jesus.
surprised when this run blasted straight past the previous duration record and continued upwards, passing by an entire year of duration. Now, Timo's run was incredibly good, but it wasn't perfect, and Japanese player Ajikara saw an opening. He was able to capitalize on Timo's slightly slower lap 2 and barely lower the time by 73 milliseconds. Timo immediately took the record back, but the damage was done. The run that had lasted for over a year was finally beaten. At this point,
Wow.
the void created by Jimmy's Sweet Sweet Canyon record had
Wow.
been filled, so there were plenty of records ready to take the top spot. In fact, the closest record behind Twisted Mansion was now only 2 days away away. So on the 9th of April 2019, Toad Harbor 150cc by Swift claimed the top spot. This run also fell into the category of
another one I love.
that were on
This game
tracks
rules.
that nobody really loved playing. With the exception of the tram hop on lap 2, the run is almost completely comprised of straight driving with a few turns. Despite the lack of players, this record's days
Oh my god, that's so
It
clean.
had already been tied by a Japanese player named Nasuno, who was still doing attempts to beat it outright. And only a few weeks later, Nasuno beat the record. He missed a coin on the first lap, but due to improved driving on the second and third, he was able to lower the time by about 60 milliseconds. And on June 17th, 2019, Mario Circuit 150cc by K4i overtook Toad Harbor as the game's longest-lasting record. Due to how basic it was, there were very few places where runners could save time on this
Holy
track.
fuck, man.
Regardless, half a year
The
later, a
precision.
new record was posted by a player named Seabass. There weren't really any noticeable differences between the runs, but due to imperceptible improvements, it was 4 milliseconds faster, less than a quarter of a frame. Soon after that, another run
Less
hit
than a quarter of a
592
frame.
days, and this one looked like it might stay around for a while. It was on dry desert, which immediately makes it unappealing
Holy
to anyone with
fuck.
eyes. Beyond that, you're on 150cc, which means that there isn't much interesting tech to do. But the most important reason why this record hadn't been beaten yet was the person who set it, Lation. In early 2018, Lation had gone on a rampage, lowering the dry desert record by 800 milliseconds. This would be insane on any track, but on a course as basic as dry desert? This was unbelievable amounts of time save. So what did Lation do to lower the record this much? The answer is, it's just better everywhere. Every single aspect of this run is simply done phenomenally well. And because of this, the run was so solid that nobody even wanted to attempt to close the half-second gap between his record and second place.
Jesus.
But right before 2 years
Half
of
second is
duration,
huge
it was
at this
finally
point.
taken down by one of the best 8 Deluxe players ever, Alberto. Shortly afterward, the duration record was taken by Ejikara and his 150cc Toad's Turnpike run. This was a strong record for many of the same reasons that Dry was. It was a fairly unappealing track to play, aided by
That's
a
gotta
strong
be
run from a top
crazy
player
when the
that was
camera
very
screws
dedicated
up on
to
you
the
and you
track.
gotta
But
still keep the
also, due to
precision.
the fact that this course is so simple and there are so few turns to optimize, this run was about as close to perfection as you could get. So it was going to be brutally difficult to lower the time.
Dude, this
any
fucking
further.
eyelash is
8
driving me
months
crazy,
later,
can you
it
tell?
was finally beaten by Ejikara himself. Somehow, he had managed to squeeze another 15 milliseconds of time from this track, ending the run's reign at 892 days. But this time was
Jesus.
different. For the past year, the duration record had traded hands
yeah,
pretty
summoning
quickly
salt all the
after
way.
being beaten. This was due to a pocket of a few hard-to-beat runs that had all been gaining duration together. When one was taken, the rest just kept moving upwards, overtaking it in the process. But now, this reserve of records had been completely drained.
I love this
Ejikara's
graph.
run was now an
It's
island
so
without
clean.
anything even
So
close
stupid,
to it
but it's
for
so
the next
clean.
year and a half. And even the records down here kept getting beaten, driving the gap farther and farther away. We were gonna be here for a while.
756 days
June
later.
6th, 2022, and Ejikara's Toad's Turnpike run has been at the top of the longest-lasting record list for 1,000 days, a longer period of time than the duration record itself. But finally, there was something approaching it. Mute City 150cc by Stir. In the days leading up to his now 877-day-old run, Stir had set 9 other records on this course, across which he lowered the record by 222 milliseconds. Compared to a lot of other instances of time save, even across those included in this video, this might not seem like a lot, especially over the course of 10 individual records. But that's the point. The time save is impressive because of how small it is. These weren't large chunks of easy improvement. These records were achieved by pure dedication and pushing the track to its absolute limit. And the final run was the culmination of this, being as close to Mute City perfection as you could get. There are so many places in this run where he gets within mere pixels of falling off or hitting a wall, and the Shroomless shortcut is flawless on all laps. This was one of the strongest runs set in this game so far, and it showed. 15 days later, it claimed the title of longest standing record with no sign of slowing down. A few months later, and the record was approaching 4 digits of duration. But then, tragedy struck. At 991 days, Wave 4 of the DLC released.
I wish Eternal was here because she would drop the catastrophe or some
Could have been a
shit.
great day for speedrunning. 8 more courses to explore, optimize, and play on. But for the duration category, this was a nightmare. Because in addition to all the new content that was added, speed and acceleration stats for some kart parts had been adjusted. These changes resulted in kart combos so good that they allowed runners to set times much lower than the current track records without a lot of the deep optimization that had been required to get them originally. Records started dropping like flies.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Mute City run held on for barely 3 days before it was beaten. But would there even be a run that could take over from Mute City? After the dust had settled a bit, candidates were scarce. The balance patch had eviscerated the 150cc leaderboards. There were only a handful of courses that had records from before Wave 4. The 200 leaderboards had fared a bit better, but still nearly 2/3 of the records had been replaced. But there was a small sliver of hope. It turns out that Mute City wasn't the only track that Stur had pushed to perfection. There was one more record he had set that was arguably even better than his Mute City run, and it had survived the balance patch. With the exception of a single
man,
day
good
in
music
late
choices, the
2020,
whole video.
Stur had held the record on this track for nearly 5 years consecutively and had set 24 records in that period, resulting in the 59,968 that was still active. There are so many places where a run on this track can be killed, but when you do every single one of these perfectly, you get a record that is truly one of a kind. So it was a surprise to absolutely no one when it tanked yet another balance patch with ease and continued flying upwards. And on February 19th, 2024, it happened. Mario Circuit passed Mute City at 994 days. Only 6 left until a 4-digit duration, and who knew how much beyond that. But on this day, something unbelievable happened. Stur posted a record on GBA Mario Circuit 200, forever locking his record at 1,000 days of duration. Now, Stur had done this run a few weeks beforehand in preparation for 1,000 days, so technically his 59,968 hadn't stood alone for 1,000 days, but no other player had managed to overtake him in this time, so the official number was still 1,000. With this run beaten,
it makes
Stur no
sense.
longer
It's his
had
own
any
record.
active records longer than a couple hundred days old, meaning his time as the longest-lasting record holder was almost certainly over. But perhaps it was for the best, because what is up next is possibly the most legendary Mario Kart 8 Deluxe record ever set. So what made Alpha's run on this track so strong? The answer lies in the course itself. Cheeseland is an incredibly luck-based and inconsistent track, which makes the numerous difficult tricks already found on this course infinitely harder. Firstly, the beginnings of laps 2 and 3 have a very difficult shortcut where you go straight through the cheese blocks. You have to time multiple incredibly precise hops in order to get through this fast enough to avoid losing all your speed in the off-road. And immediately afterwards, there's another nearly impossible gauntlet where you have to perfectly thread the needle between the edge of the tunnel and another set of cheese blocks. On top of all of that, your driving on the rest of the course needs to be practically flawless to make sure the run is both fast enough and you have the alignment for the numerous shortcuts. And if that wasn't enough, you also have to deal with a ton of small divots and bumpy parts of the track that can completely throw you off if your driving isn't flawless. All of these things combine to make Cheeseland arguably the most brutal track in the entire speedrunning scene. And Alpha had mastered it all. He had saved so much time on this course over the years and had gotten the first sub 17, 16, and 15 second runs, and his final record on the track was the culmination of all of this, being 700 milliseconds ahead of the next closest speedrunner.
Wow, 700 seconds at that point is crazy. 700 milliseconds.
The only issue it had was a tiny slowdown during the shortcut on lap 2, but the rest of the run was so good that it didn't matter. Nobody could even get close to Alpha's driving on the rest of the course, so it stayed as the record with essentially 0 challengers. The run kept climbing the duration leaderboards. By the start of 2025, it was less than a month away from Stur's Mario Circuit run. And on January 17th, it crossed the 1,000-day threshold, becoming the longest-lasting record in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe history. But this time, it was different. This run was so insanely strong that it might just continue going forever. To beat this, they would need a miracle. and a player named James might just have something. In Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, there's a trick called motion glider that is performed by turning with the joystick and motion controls at the same time. This causes your kart to turn way more than normal and allows you to move quite a bit faster. But something really weird happens when you hit a ramp wall in this state. For some reason, it causes you to get launched to the side incredibly quickly. This is called a Genzua glider, and while it is incredibly fast, there are very few places where you can actually use it in a run.
Yo, what's up, Brian? How you doing?
In 2025, James found something really interesting. If you land from a motion glider, start a drift, and then hit another glider panel while you're tilted to the side, you still get the full effects of the trick. James shared his findings with Alberto.
See the update in crime scene? Oh, like a horror update? Yeah, I don't like that game though, so
perfect for
I was like, cool for anybody who enjoys.
Was Cheeseland. Alberto started working on finding a good setup for this, and shortly afterwards actually got a really good launch off of the second panel. It caused Lakitu to pick him up, but here's the thing. The finish line is right here, so if you do this on the final lap, you can complete the race before the pickup happens, negating the need for any recovery after this point. Over the next few hours, Alberto and James worked on making this as fast as possible, and after a few optimizations, they had a method that was way quicker than the route taken by Alpha in his world record.
Princess Fiance could have easily charged for it. I just know that there's
the longest standing record in Mario Kart
horror update. I don't know anything beyond that.
It wasn't going to be easy.
Like I said, I'm not a fan of the game, so I didn't care to.
Was aided by the most powerful glitch in the game. Alpha's run was so unbelievably good.
I gotta tell you, Brian, I finally did Spray Paint Simulator, and I was at 60% of the bridge, and I was so fucking fed up. I get to 96% and the game crashes. And I reload it and it's at 62%. I was so fucking mad. I didn't touch it for like 3 days. And I was like, do I do it again or do I just uninstall? And then I ended up doing it, but I was just like, motherfucker, man.
That he was struggling to keep up in the earlier laps. Alberto's main issue was the shortcut on lap 1. This version is especially hard because this early into the race you have less coins, which means you don't jump as far and need to be more precise. On the 31st of March, Alberto was attempting the world record live while using one of the greatest stream overlays I've ever seen. He hadn't been doing very well and was about to give up when he got on this run. He got a perfect shortcut on lap 1, and even though he had a few mistakes, he was still only a couple hundred milliseconds behind Alpha's time by the middle of the
I need to up my production value.
Glider panel and headed for the second. And after barely avoiding the chain chomp, he launched off the final glider panel, crossing the finish line 87 milliseconds ahead of Alpha. The longest lasting record in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe was finally beaten. Then, we get to today. The closest active record to Alpha's Cheeseland run is a 55-second Donut Plains run done, rather ironically, by Genzua. If nothing changes, he will take the title of longest standing record on the 11th of October, 2025. This video was very difficult to make and would never have happened without the incredible generosity of runners who helped me understand the convoluted history of this category. So one final gigantic thanks to StarXLX, Danny, Tommy, Alpha, Alberto, and James. And if you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing and leaving a like to help me continue making content like this. And thank you for watching.
I absolutely will. That was awesome. Just by watching this, seems very inspired by Summoning Salt, but that's not a bad thing because Summoning Salt rules. That was great. That was great. I'm going to have to check out... Yeah, you know what? Let's just take a quick look. What kind of videos? Yeah, can you complete a lap in one drift in Mario Kart 8? So it's like all Mario Kart? Honestly? Sure. Wait, what? This is all your videos? 51 videos, 147,000 subscribers. 3 years. So it's like 30-second clips. And then a bunch more than put, I guess, okay, so just like really high quality Mario Kart videos. Interesting. All right, well, that was a lot of fun. YouTube, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and yeah, more reaction videos in the future. Peace. Free money!